Hello, everyone. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 25th of July, 2025. I am very glad you're here. The ongoing saga of these revelations about Epstein are just mind-boggling. We had another bit of breaking news last night that we're going to talk about with regard to the now infamous birthday book. And Trump's related action against the Wall Street Journal. And then we also have to talk about the fact that Todd Blanch, Trump's personal lawyer, now Deputy U.S. Attorney General, plus somehow, I forgot this until this morning, the acting librarian of Congress, I guess everybody has more than one job in the Trump administration, is meeting with Maxwell again today. And we have to talk about that. There's a lot of other things breaking today. We will get to them. Thank you for being here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I was a Wall Street lawyer for 15 years, did a lot of human rights work on the side. I'm a lifelong activist. And now I work directly with folks like you who care about the future and are here to make a really big impact, notwithstanding these absolutely insane times. If you like what you see here, please don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, ding that bell notification, and drop me a comment. Okay, so breaking late yesterday, courtesy of the New York Times, we learned that notwithstanding Trump's claim that he didn't write this salacious letter that was included in Epstein's birthday book, he's in fact listed as a contributor to the birthday book in the book itself. And on top of that, the New York Times revealed last night that they had a copy of The Art of the Comeback, one of Trump's ghost-written books about business, that was inscribed to Jeffrey Epstein in laudatory terms. So I had a question last night while I was looking at this, and we were, coming out of knowing that Todd Blanch had interviewed Maxwell and was then going to come back today. More on that in a minute. I had a question about how the New York Times got a hold of this stuff. And it turns out that someone in Jeffrey Epstein's estate is now apparently leaking these things to the press. And the New York Times, you had to read between the lines to figure this out. But essentially what happened here was that when we first learned about the birthday book from the Wall Street Journal, what we heard was that the book was in the possession of Epstein's estate. That was how it was described. And so for those of you who don't know, I mean, many of you may know if you've had a parent or someone you know pass away with something that they plan to pass down to future generations or to an entity, that estates kind of stay open until they don't, right? You have an executor of your estate. And in the case of Epstein, after he died, his estate became the defendant in a number of civil lawsuits by victims, okay? And there were efforts to get money out of his estate to recompense those victims for the harm that they suffered. So what's odd about this is that, the Wall Street Journal said the birthday book was in the possession of Epstein's estate. And then yesterday, the New York Times reported that they had seen the book. And they had also gotten a copy of this signed version of The Art of the Comeback with the actual inscription from Jeffrey Epstein. There's actually a photograph of it in the article inside the New York Times. So this raises kind of very interesting questions, like why is someone inside Jeffrey Epstein's estate leaking this material to the press? It's wild, especially because the estate is a defendant, right, in these civil lawsuits against Epstein's estate for money from the victims. So all very curious, okay? And then on top of it, we learned yesterday that Todd Blanch had met for 6 hours yesterday with Ghislaine Maxwell at the federal penitentiary where she is serving 20 years for sex trafficking. 6 hours is a long time. And I just have to say this, from my days in litigation, particularly when we were talking about a deposition environment where you as an attorney are asking questions of someone under oath, I am, by the way, not convinced that that is what's happening here. I would be highly doubtful that, they swore her under oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And, there are lots of things about this that smack of off-the-record behavior, okay? We'll get to that in a second. But 7 hours is usually what you're allocated for a full day of depositions. You usually get 3 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the afternoon, and, that's it. And in some local courts, you have to actually petition for more time than that in complex cases. Reminder, I used to litigate securities fraud and class action cases. And sometimes we had depositions that went on for days. But you can get an awful lot done in 6 hours of time. So the question that I have looking at this is, what ate up all that time? What is Todd Blanch trying to get at? And keeping in mind that he was Trump's personal criminal defense attorney for purposes of the Stormy Daniels case, and now he's allegedly acting in his role as the Deputy Attorney General of the United States at the DOJ, what do we really think he's up to? Okay, so, and why is he meeting with her for a second day? All right, so I have some speculation on this, and I've already kind of made it clear to people that we don't need Ghislaine Maxwell. Let me just say this again, okay? I want to make it really clear. We don't need her. Every single thing that we need to know about what happened here is inside files at the Department of Justice that they could release today. And Robert Garcia, as ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, in conjunction with the Democrats who really pulled a fast and very strategic move yesterday in House Oversight, now have a looming subpoena out to the DOJ for those files to be released in a completely unredacted format. We'll see what happens with that, okay? But the Democrats, courtesy of Robert Garcia, are finally doing the right thing on this, at least to that extent, in that little group of Democrats. I'm very pleased about it. But all that said, the DOJ already has everything that they need, right? There was an ongoing, years-long investigation into Jeffrey Epstein and his crimes. They seized thousands and thousands of photographs, videotapes, documents. They seized hard drives. They seized other electronic records. They took paperwork, all phone records, right? Access records to his properties. They took cell phones. They have so much material on this, and all we need is what's in it, right? That's it. We don't need her. So no one, again, I feel like I've said this 3 times this week here, but I'm going to say it again. Nobody should be expecting that we're going to get some bombshell out of Ghislaine Maxwell, because she is a convicted sex offender. She is a child rapist. I have to keep reminding everybody of this. She wasn't just a procurer, right? She was actively involved in the sexual assault of these kids. And one of the things that we need to expect here is that because of what we know about her, that during her trial, she was described as a serial liar, completely incapable of telling the truth, right? When the DOJ under Biden prosecuted her for sex trafficking, over and over and over again, they proved that she had lied to the FBI, okay? We know that, at the bare minimum, there's something going on with her that probably leans towards sociopathy, if not psychopathology, that would lead her to be a part of this incredibly foul sex trafficking operation that victimized about 1,000 girls by current estimates, right? We do not need her. So why is he meeting with her? Well, this is my speculation. Again, big flashing speculation banner over my head, like I always do whenever I just want you to know. I have no inside information on this, but in my years and years and years as an attorney, this is what my speculation is about this. My speculation is that Todd Blanch is sitting there trying to get her to name names of Democrats who are potentially people who perpetrated these crimes along with Epstein. And they did this thing last night where they released that Leon Black, major Democratic donor, and Bill Clinton, their names also appeared in the Epstein files. This is not breaking news, all right? And by the way, I think we're all in the same boat here. Nobody really cares on the Democratic side if Democrats are brought down from this, right? The Republicans seem to think this is high scandal, right? Oh, we're going to back off of it. No. Anybody who was engaged in this conduct deserves to go down. Full stop. And, Robert Garcia said it. I've said it here multiple times. Pretty much every commentator on the left has said it at this point. We don't care if there are Democrats in those files. I don't care if there's Democratic donors in those files. Makes no difference to me. All of them deserve to be held accountable for what they did. Okay. But my suspicion is that what he is doing in these meetings with Maxwell is trying to drum up dirt that yet again, we talked about this a lot yesterday, will seek to draw attention away from Trump's involvement, his intimate, regular involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. And Trump himself tried to do this morning on the lawn of the White House on his way to Scotland, where he claimed, why isn't anybody talking about Bill Clinton? He practically lived with Jeffrey Epstein. Well, we are talking about Bill Clinton, but what we're not talking about is you. And your name is all over it. And you were best friends with him by both sides' discussions, right? We have interviews that describe their relationship as exactly that. We have testimony from victims, including an interview that was done last night on Jen Psaki, talking about how Trump and Epstein discussed a 16-year-old girl as potentially being passed from one to the other. So, this, again, this entire interview, in my view, is part of the cover-up. Because what is most likely happening there is they are digging for dirt on who might have been involved with Epstein, who is arguably on the Democratic side of the fence. And also, there is a possibility that what they are doing is essentially a pay to play to buy her silence, right? And again, this is something that I would not be shocked to see a commutation of her sentence. I don't think they're going to pardon her right away, but there could be a deal for there to be a pardon in his last days in office. And this could be an exchange for her not revealing, because she and Trump were friends. Like, there's so many photographs of them all together, right? Like, he wished her well, like at the time that she was initially indicted. So, all of this from the standpoint of what the expectations are here need to be really tamped down, okay? They are either drilling for dirt on Democrats, finding some way to negotiate for her release from prison in exchange for her silence on Trump, or both. Like, that's really it. And my bet from this standpoint is that we're going to see just an incredibly deep effort to hide, distract, malign others in order to keep the focus off Trump. And we've even seen a couple of right-wing reporters talk recently about, in the last day or so, about Maxwell being a victim. And I have to say that to me was revolting. If they lionize Ghislaine Maxwell, I don't know, man. We're gonna see a whole new set of cracks open up inside MAGA, because she's not a victim. She was an active participant for decades in this, and there is testimony from victims of her sexual violence against them. So this whole thing, at this point, is in my opinion, again, this is speculation, but in my opinion, nothing more than a more advanced part of the cover-up. And I think everybody should be prepared for what the likely outcome of that is going to be. Just a couple of other notes here on all of this. There continue to be ongoing efforts to distract, as I just mentioned. One of the things that we talked about yesterday was Tulsi Gabbard giving this insane set of statements at the White House press briefing, claiming that Obama had engaged in treason, which of course is punishable by death. And now we have Trump at every opportunity, every single time he's asked about Epstein, saying, why aren't you talking about Obama committing treason to fix the election? I mean, again, I just have to point out, if Obama had fixed the election, Trump wouldn't have been elected in 2016. Like, the logic of it just defies me, right? Plus, we have all sorts of prior reports, including one signed by Marco Rubio, indicating that Russia did in fact interfere in the election, that many things in the Steele dossier were true. But again, this is an attempt to rehash through his traditional form of racism the idea that he's always the victim, right? And also to create a massive distraction away from his participation in a child sex trafficking ring. So one of the things that we also just have to take away from all of this, which is really more of a sociological observation than anything else, and a psychological evaluation of Trump and his people more than anything else, look at how hard they are trying to create diversions from this. I mean, I said it yesterday, and I feel even more strongly about this today. Whatever it is that is in those files about Donald Trump has to be absolutely awful. Because if it wasn't, they wouldn't be going to these lengths, right? They wouldn't be over and over again in multiple different arenas trying to create distractions and, push blame onto other people, name other names as an effort to kind of say, oh, it wasn't just me, right? Release the MLK files, right? I mean, this is crazy town. And the only reason, it really smacks of flop, sweat, panic, that this is the kind of thing that they're being reduced to, okay? And that they're choosing to do right now. Whatever it is that's in there. I mean, and I have some ideas about that, because, you don't recover 11,000 videotapes and photographs without the prospect of him potentially being in some of that, right? But whatever it is that's in there, it's bad, like really, really, really bad. And so I just want folks to keep in mind that the desperation is an indication of guilt. And that in and of itself is a reason why we have to keep digging and why this whole thing is not going to die. One other thing I just want to say about that, because there was some reporting in Axios, which isn't really that reliable any longer. So I'm a little hesitant to, like, they're definitely tilting right now. But I just want to mention, which is that they interviewed apparently one centrist Democrat elected, no idea who this is, but I have some guesses, who claimed that that outside the Beltway, nobody cared about Epstein. And that, the Democrats shouldn't be pursuing it, and then there's speculation in there about like, oh, well, the Democrats know there's Democrats in it. So that, there are some of these centrist Dems don't want to lean hard into what Robert Garcia and the progressives are doing, because it was actually Summer Lee who introduced the motion for the subpoena into the House Oversight Committee, who I adore. She's amazing. One of the things that I think we need to think through here is that regardless of party, there are still people who think these girls and victims are disposable and think that those of us, the multitudes of us, right, like, would venture to say much greater than 50% of the US population, when you take into account all survivors, men, women, trans, non-binary people, if they think that nobody cares about this, they should go out and actually talk to some of their constituents. And I'm going to remind everybody that, the latest polling that was done on this issue showed that more than 75% of Democrats, Republicans, and independents wanted the totality of the Epstein files released. This is not going away. And it's not just a Beltway issue. This is a really serious come to Jesus moment about what this country intends to do about the sexual exploitation of children by powerful white men. I mean, it's a real moment. And, I said something on Blue Sky this morning, which I think is worth repeating. Back in the main part of the Me Too era, many of you were with me then, but we had a lot of conversations on this broadcast about how we needed to get prepared that our icons would fall, right? And I remember thinking about this specifically because Tanya Selvaratnam, who was the ex of Eric Schneiderman, was a very dear friend of mine, is a very dear friend of mine, and had been speaking to the New Yorker about all the violence that he perpetrated against her before that story broke and he was forced to resign within hours, okay? He was a Democratic lion, right? And still did horrific things behind closed doors, okay? And I will just say here that from my perspective, again, it may be that our icons will fall. I have to say that I have very deep, weird suspicions about why Nancy Pelosi is telling people to move on from this issue. Like, does she know something? I think that's a question worth asking. Like, why would you tell anyone to move on from this issue when it involves the president of the United States being engaged in sex trafficking of children? Why? Why would anybody move on from this issue? Why would you ever advocate for that? I mean, it's like a gimme from a political standpoint as well. So, I always try to come on here and give you guys the straight shit, like I don't want anybody to be unprepared. I don't have any inside information on this one like I did with Schneiderman, which I didn't disclose, by the way, until after the story broke because Tanya deserved her privacy and her security. But, one of the things that I just want to say here is that, we have to be prepared to let the chips fall where they may. I'm prepared to let the chips fall where they may. And I think that we have to come to terms with the fact that the sexual exploitation of girls, the sexual harassment of girls, right? Like I was talking this morning about what happened with Monica Lewinsky at 22 and Bill Clinton at 49, right? That was a power dynamic, okay? And she was destroyed to the point of suicidality by this country for what he did to her, right? We have to be prepared at this point that all bets are off because it's a real reckoning moment. And it should be. If titans of industry, if big Democratic donors, if, like tech billionaires are in those files, right? We know that, Bill Gates was on that plane. If that's how this goes down, let the chips fall. Seriously. Because the lives of those girls matter. They matter just as much as the lives of anybody else. Those girls are not any less valuable than these like uber rich white guys who decided that raping children was okay. And they deserve justice, and they deserve accountability, and they deserve safety, and they deserve to be seen. And I don't care who's on that list. And I don't think any of us should either. We do not know that RFK Jr. is there. I just have to say one thing about this, please, 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 please. Just because a photograph was taken does not mean he's in the files. Yes, a photograph was taken of him at a party with Epstein, but it was also published by the New York Post. So one of the things that I just have to say here that's kind of driving me a little crazy, little warning here, and this is me, like, former litigator, very aware of the federal rules of evidence, all right? I saw somebody this morning, for instance, speculating that Melania had been involved in recruiting girls for Epstein. Okay, pause, loud pause on this, okay? What we know, or at least what has actually been reported, was that Epstein may have introduced Melania to Trump. And that, in fact, the first time that Melania and Trump got together, I'm not going into the details of that, was on Trump's plane. Okay, not Epstein's plane, sorry. The first time Trump and Melania got together was on Epstein's plane. So let me ask you a question. You're a 19-year-old model from an Eastern European country, from an incredibly poor background, right? Like we all know, right, that like these modeling contests that Epstein and Trump and Jean-Luc Brunel, who, by the way, raped tons of models, were all involved in, were actually recruiting efforts, right? Everybody gets that? Everybody should get that, okay? So when you look at this situation, what's more likely here? Like, seriously, I want people to consider this from a logical standpoint. What's more likely here? That Melania was recruited like dozens and dozens and dozens of other models to service these rich white men? Or that she's like somehow a big part of the operation? Like, use your brains, okay? Like this is a moment, by the way, as with all big breaking news stories, where you really have to use critical thinking about what you read on the internet, okay? Because there's lots of room for speculation. And because people are attaching a salacious like vibe to this story, which drives me crazy because it's about child rape, there's lots of speculation that like somebody else must be involved. And, here's a photograph and that means X, right? Again, I have to remind you all, sometimes a photograph is just a photograph, right? I couldn't introduce that photograph as evidence in a court of law without some kind of testimony against RFK Jr. that showed that he'd actually been engaged in this kind of conduct for purposes of a criminal prosecution. I'd be laughed out of court. Just saying, like, here's a photograph, therefore he must be guilty of sex trafficking. People would laugh in your face. You probably get disbarred. So it's very important in this arena, okay, to rely on the evidence that we know. And this is one reason why the release of the files is so important, okay, because it's evidence. Photographs, videotapes, phone records, cell phone communications, laptop documentation, right? Emails between Trump's staff and other people, right? That's evidence that can be admitted in a court of law. So just be very careful and cautious about how you're receiving information about this right now. And, keep up the noise about it, but also make sure that, you are using your brain. And I'm just going to say one other thing here, because this is the second time this week I've done this. I hate doing this. There are comments in the chat sometimes that really piss me off when we're live on YouTube. And they're the kind of comments that dismiss this violence as if it's a joke, okay? I'm going to say one thing here, okay? We do not know the backstory on Melania Trump. We don't have any idea, okay? And while there are lots of things to criticize about Melania Trump, like a lot, okay, the shit that drives me crazy is the stuff about her being like a nude model or, in porn, of which there is actually no evidence, right? The stuff about her, like allegedly being, she takes so much blame for him. Have people noticed this? That like, there's all this sexist crap about her that, like, yes, she's married to him. Yes, she's getting paid off. Yes, I'm not suggesting that from the standpoint of like her positioning in society that she's one of the good guys. Okay. But simultaneously, like, watch yourselves, please. Like, we do not have to be sexist. We do not have to be misogynist to critique what people are up to. All right. And, from the standpoint of how we all look at this, like, please understand that there is a long continuum that runs through all of these stories that is fundamentally about hating women and girls and believing that women and girls, and I'm not going to dismiss trans and non-binary people because they're also included in this, are entirely disposable. And when you engage in comments like that, you're on the continuum. Full stop. Full stop. So if you don't want things like this to be perpetuated, don't be a part of the problem. In other words, all right? Like, please, please, please. Okay. Couple of other things we have to talk about today. Alina Habba has managed to keep her job as the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey. Somebody asked me on the Patreon feed, again, reminder, pause. Let me tell you something really great. Okay. Before I get to that, this is really important, actually. Our team has been having meetings with the senior folks, like C-suite level folks at Patreon over the last couple of weeks. And very good news about this. We have a whole bunch of new features that are going to be rolled out to our Patreon subscribers. These are features, by the way, that are not totally public on the Patreon platform yet. Partially because we've been with Patreon now for literally like, I think almost 8 years now. And they are very invested in making sure that our Patreon subscribers get like front loaded into all the goodies because they like us and we like working with them. So this morning on Patreon, we launched, wait for it, the chat feature, which is really great because I get to talk to all of our Patreon subscribers in real time. So my anticipation now is that every morning, you all know I get up at like 4:45 in the morning and sometimes my brain is already going. I'll be dropping new chats into our chat on Patreon to chat with our paid subscribers on a regular basis. We test ran it this morning and I'm like really excited about it. It's so nice to be able to talk to our Patreon subscribers live. The one today is free, but going forward, it will only be for our paid subscribers. So if you want to get in on that chat, because it's like a sweet community over there. Like I have to say, like we've tried really hard to build a truly like great community of folks, all of whom are engaged and really trying to make a difference right now over there. And really a great thing to get involved in. So if you're interested in like getting in on the chat, go become a paid subscriber at Patreon. Our subscription tiers start as low as $5 a month. That's less than 20 cents a broadcast. And then you need to click on the community tab once you're on the inside and you'll see our chats pop up. And there will be new ones by topic when I decide to start them. So we have kind of like a welcome chat ongoing right now over there. But there's other new features coming on Patreon very soon that I'm like super excited about. I can't give away the goods yet. But I think within the next couple of weeks, we're going to be able to make some announcements about new features that are only being rolled out to a really select group of content creators on Patreon. So you should get over there, in other words, and check it out because we got a lot of really good stuff coming over there. And the Patreon people are awesome. Quite different from the Substack people. I will just say that, having kind of met with different versions of both on the platforms. I'm really down with Patreon right now entirely. Okay. So Alina Habba, one of the Patreon subscribers this morning asked how Alina Habba was able to keep her job. And this was a set of maneuvers like you would not believe. So let me explain what happened here for people who may have missed the last couple of days. Here's what happened. Okay. We had Alina Habba ousted by the judges for the District Court of the District of New Jersey by private vote. Totally legal. Nothing wrong with this. There's actually a part of the federal code that allows them to do this when an appointed U.S. attorney who has not passed Senate confirmation comes to the end of their window of time that they're allowed to do that. Okay. So they booted her out. All the judges in the District of New Jersey booted her out 2 days ago. When Pam Bondi got wind of this, and got wind of the fact that the judges had nominated a successor who was experienced and had been in that office for a very long time, Bondi fired the successor. Okay. And, I'm just going to say this. I will tell you that the subtext to all of this is the prosecution of LaMonica McIver, because Alina Habba has already been chastised by federal judges for the District Court of the District of New Jersey for stepping outside the bounds of her authority. And the prosecution of LaMonica McIver, who happens to be my rep, is doubtless, no question, entirely political in its operation. And if the judges had successfully been able to land this successor, that prosecution would have died on the vine. I have no doubt about it. Would have been gone. And all these crazy allegations that are currently being made by Habba about how people are going to get prosecuted in New Jersey, blah, 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 Ross Baraka's arrest, everything else going on with that would be gone. Gone. So, there's, in a very weird sort of way, I do not mean this as a compliment. The way that the fascists are hacking around every single loophole is disgustingly remarkable. Okay. So here's what they did. They withdrew Alina Habba's official nomination to be the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, which lined her up for Senate confirmation. Okay. Basically, they had her in a pipeline that said she can serve in this position until she's confirmed and that you have X days to get her confirmed. That's why she was on her way out as of today, because no Senate confirmation, because the Senate will not confirm her because she is wildly unqualified and also an obvious political ideologue. Not a chance. Okay. Even with majority Republican control of the Senate, there's no way she would have gotten that job. So they pulled her nomination. And under the law, when they pull her nomination, they can then make her the interim acting U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey. Now, it does mean that there's still a ticking clock, okay? Because when you're acting in that position, rather than as a putative nominee, you only have 210 days to serve. So I guess the good news is that unless they try to finagle this again, they will be able to boot her out again in 9 months. But all that said, this is a crazy situation, and they're doing it to benefit Trump's personal lawyer. Again, a personal lawyer for Donald Trump. She was on the team for the Stormy Daniels defense, someone who was obviously an ideologue. And then on top of it, may I just point out, has never done a criminal prosecution in her life, right? She was a real estate attorney when Donald Trump hired her. She's possibly the most unqualified person to be a U.S. attorney that has ever held that role. So all of this, sorry, making myself hoarse. All of this is shocking and finagling and manipulative and not at all how the law was ever intended to work. Plus, there is one silver lining to it, because I just want everybody to imagine how you would feel about a criminal prosecution brought by Alina Habba in the District Court of New Jersey if you were one of the judges on that bench now. Right? You're one of the judges on the District Court for the District of Columbia, all of whom voted in a private meeting to remove Alina Habba from her job because she's so unqualified and acting outside the scope of her authority. And then Pam Bondi finds a way to stick it to the entire bench by leaving Alina Habba in her job. Does anybody think Alina Habba is going to get a favorable view from this court? I think, notwithstanding the oath that everybody takes to uphold the Constitution and to be fair and impartial, going into any courtroom with a crazy prosecution, like the prosecution against LaMonica McIver, is not really going to get a very favorable reception from this bench. So it's going to be a wild ride here in New Jersey under federal law for a while, at least as far as actions that might be brought by the U.S. Attorney's Office. And we will have to see what happens next. I guess the one good bit of good news is that this entire situation has managed to piss off every single judge in the District Court for the District of New Jersey. All right. We had a bunch of questions on the Patreon feed this morning. I'm not really sure why, about when the Supreme Court is going to rule on tariffs. So just so everybody understands, right? We had this ruling out of the Court of Trade. We talked about this back when it happened. The Trump's entire tariff scheme was illegal. Remember this? And then that went on appeal to the appeals court for the Federal Circuit, which is one of those specific circuit courts that isn't bound by a location. It actually, like, their jurisdiction is nationwide, but they only handle certain issues like trade, like patent, like intellectual property. They handle a very specific universe of types of lawsuits, claims, prosecutions. And the appeals court stayed the ruling on tariffs, right? And then it's getting appealed up to the Supreme Court. So the question here is, when is SCOTUS going to rule? And that question was asked of me 3 times this morning. I don't know why. I was like doing my legal research like I do before every broadcast. I was like, why is everybody asking me about this morning? So somebody must have written a story about it that got into your feeds. But I will just say this, okay? The Supreme Court is going to rule when it rules. And we know what they've done with the shadow docket recently, where essentially they've dropped horrible opinions, where the 6th Justice Supreme Court conservative majority says nothing, and then Kagan or Sotomayor or Ketanji Brown Jackson writes a scathing dissent, okay? I don't know how this one's going to go. I honestly, I can't call it. And there doesn't seem to be any indication right now that there's actually even a briefing schedule on this in front of SCOTUS. So for those who are asking me that question, can't answer it. There's no information out there in the public domain about it, at least not that I could find in half an hour of research. So not sure why you're all asking about it, but that's the answer. There's no indication yet about when they're going to rule. Okay. Yesterday, Trump issued another absolutely insane and illegal executive order. Okay. So what this executive order seeks to do is essentially criminalize being unhoused. What it does is it says, if you happen to be sleeping on the street, or, there are other indications of vagrancy, which, by the way, I have to remind everybody, vagrancy laws were used to round up and incarcerate poor people and unhoused people for a very long period of time in this country. They were a part of mass incarceration, right? And to the point where there are stories, in my own circles of Black and brown parents saying to their teenage sons and daughters, don't ever leave the house without ID that shows where you live, because they remember being challenged as vagrants just for walking down a specific street, okay? One of the things that I want people to understand here is this is an attempt to criminalize poverty and to criminalize being unhoused, but it is entirely outside the scope of the presidency. I mean, once again, these EOs, I have to remind everybody, the EOs are not law. They're not law. They're not law, okay? This is essentially, EOs are supposed to be instructions that the president gives to the agencies on what to do to execute on the law, right? They don't remake the law, okay? And here, particularly where policing is ordinarily delegated to localities and states, the idea that he can randomly say, I'm empowering the police to round up homeless people and put them in prison doesn't carry really any legal weight. But that said, there is a long legacy in this country of criminalizing the poor, okay? Criminalizing people who are on the edges of society, so to speak. And I read this, it's going to be challenged in court no matter what. I can guarantee it. The ACLU is probably already teeing it up. But one of the things that people should be aware of is that essentially what he seems to be trying to do is to give a permission slip to local law enforcement to round up anyone who they think, or claim, because they don't even have to have evidence of it, is homeless, right? Or otherwise sleeping on the street. So I understand why it terrified people. And also I look at how this potentially could be executed through a lens of what are they actually going to be able to get done? So on that front, I want to just give you guys, I always like to give you guys some good news, okay? In Los Angeles, in the last few days, there have been a series of very interesting legal developments in the context of these mass roundups of brown folks in LA and around LA, okay? And also the roundups of protesters during the most recent series of uprisings against ICE, okay? And here's what's happening. The attorneys, the U.S. attorneys, and the local attorneys, like the district attorney of LA, who are trying to make cases against protesters and people who have been rounded up, are finding that grand juries are refusing to indict. And, this is interesting because I know many of you are probably familiar with that phrase of like, a good prosecutor could get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. Not here. Grand juries are refusing to do it. And I have to remind everybody, grand juries are like everyday people just like you and me. You can get called to serve on a grand jury over the course of like a couple of months. Like often the way grand juries are sat is that you come in a day a week or a couple days a week and you hear criminal, civil testimony that like, well, actually it's always criminal testimony that, to decide whether or not somebody should be indicted. Okay. Just everyday people. And everyday people in Los Angeles are refusing to indict. The stories that broke over the last couple of days also indicated something really interesting from off-the-record sources inside prosecutors' offices. To this effect, the comments were essentially ICE and the LAPD have been rounding people up without probable cause. And what we're finding is that there's a lot of people who have joined ICE without adequate training. ICE is definitely not training them. They're just like setting them loose on the streets to kidnap people. And they're not actually satisfying the legal standard for arrest. And so these prosecutors are also saying like, there's a total lack of reliability right now in ICE and the people working for it, that you could actually make out a criminal prosecution on the basis of the conduct alleged. This is a big reflection, by the way, of what's happening with LaMonica McIver, because we've all seen the footage where she was just asking questions about why Ross Baraka was being arrested. She herself was shoved against a fence by an ICE goon, right? All she was doing was asking questions. And they claimed that was like obstruction of justice and assault, okay? No, there's actually like no evidence for that. Very similar situation happening in LA, except with regard to like everyday protesters and people who are being rounded up. And so there's a lack of credibility growing. This is good news. There's a lack of credibility growing in terms of the reliability of the testimony and the evidence and the probable cause that ICE has to arrest people and their police buddies have to arrest people. And that in and of itself is good. Like, I want grand juries to be very suspicious right now of anything that comes before them like this. And they should be. Right? It's an indication of the way in which ICE is not just not doing the right thing, but not doing the right thing in the context of what they even need to do legally to shore up the things that they're claiming. And if indictments can't be brought, people have to be released. So it's very good news. It's very good news. Okay, final question for today. This broadcast has been very long. Thank you all for bearing with me. Concerns the 25th Amendment. So there were a couple of questions on the Patreon feed this morning about like, if the Epstein dam breaks and we find out that there's videotape of Trump or photographs of Trump, or, like dozens of allegations against Trump that, or records of things in the Epstein records, will the 25th Amendment be invoked? And the answer to that is absolutely not. So I have to remind you all how the 25th Amendment works, okay? It is essentially where the vice president and a majority of the cabinet get together and declare that the president is no longer fit to hold the office, okay? I have to remind you of like who's in this cabinet, okay? Because it's Pete Hegseth and it's Linda McMahon, right? It's Tulsi Gabbard, who's out there claiming that Obama committed treason, right? It's really like an insane group of unqualified people, like half of whom come from Fox News, all right? There is not a smoking chance in hell that a majority of this cabinet is going to vote to have Trump essentially removed from office because they think he's incompetent or incapable of carrying out the job. That will not happen. And, I have to say that at least in the first Trump administration, there were like arguably in the first instance, somewhat qualified, partially moral people, right? Like Rex Tillerson, who, granted, was the CEO of Exxon, maybe not the most moral person on earth, but also like took no shit from Trump, right? Left when he realized that Trump like literally was incapable of understanding foreign policy. This cabinet is made up of idiots and incredibly unqualified people who are only there because they were big donors to Trump's campaign, because they were Fox News or News Nation personalities, or because they have simply pledged their fealty to Trump above everything else. So there is no likelihood, zero likelihood, put your expectations in the basement that the 25th Amendment is going to be invoked here, okay? The more likely outcome And again, huge speculation warning over this, but I'm just going to say it because I said it last week when we had that crazy diagnosis of him with like chronic venal insufficiency, and the nurses took to TikTok claiming that it looked a hell of a lot more like congestive heart failure. The greater likelihood here is that they're setting him up for some kind of medical excuse to resign. Okay. And I'm not making a prediction on that front. I'm just going to tell you that there's an argument to be made from an analysis standpoint that there is an exit ramp in the event that it's needed for medical reasons. Okay. And I think that's a much more likely outcome. Now, there's always people who come to me, because I said this for years during the first Trump administration, who will say he'll never resign, he's a narcissist. But I have to remind you all of this because, I've said that, right? But I got to remind you of something else, okay? When we are in the when a narcissist is in the throes of narcissistic collapse, okay, which is a documented phenomenon in the psychological literature, what they do is they withdraw and they become fundamentally incapable of functioning in any kind of like executive function way, in life, at work, in any other means, okay? And we've talked before about narcissistic injury and what it looks like, right? Like Obama coming at Trump during the White House Correspondents' Dinner all those years ago was like an ultimate narcissistic injury. Trump getting convicted was a major narcissistic injury. He totally lost it, was incoherent on the campaign trail for months, right? This situation, if the evidence in the Epstein files is what we believe it to be, right? Or we suspect it to be, would be fundamentally the ultimate narcissistic injury. And I would not be surprised. I'm not going to call it. I'm not going to game it out by percentages, but one possible outcome would be his resignation to avoid fundamentally having to expose himself to the public scorn of it nonstop, and to the loss of his base and the disgust of the Freedom Caucus, right? So anything can happen. It's a good reminder. And, Mariam Kaba has said it many, many times. We have no idea what's coming down the pike. We have no idea what dominoes could fall, right? So it's all the more reason to stay engaged. This is like your reminder. Stay engaged. Stay committed in your work locally. Stay engaged in your organizing and your activism and your mutual aid work. Get involved. Get involved in your local community, because every single thing that we do matters, and we have no idea how this is going to end. And, I've said before, we could spend hours talking about the potential of JD Vance and what that would look like and blah, blah, blah. That's a conversation for another day. But just know this, cults don't hold together when the ideologue is gone. And so we will have to see what the outcome of this looks like. But I will also just say this, because I think this is a really good final note to end on. Mariam Kaba said something, I think it was late last night, on Blue Sky that is really worth considering, okay? It was this, I'm going to paraphrase it. It's not exact quotation. What she said was, if the project right now is to hold America together by duct tape on the incredibly shoddy foundations on which it was built, that is not a worthy project. If the aim, on the other hand, is to remake America from the ground up in a better vision and a better way, that actually lives into what we always claim to be, but never were. She didn't say that. Those are my words. That is a worthy project. And I happen to agree with that. And one of the things about all this chaos is that it presents tremendous opportunity. And that opportunity comes from people like you and me doing the work where we live and being a part of bigger projects and learning how to organize and mobilize and, showing up in whatever way that you can, right? Because all of us are going to have to be a part of what comes next. And, anything can happen. Regimes can collapse overnight. It's happened before in other parts of the world, more times than I can count. I have friends who are involved in writing constitutions in other nations, right? People who worked deep in government, people who are constitutional scholars that I went to law school with. So anything can happen. And it's incredibly important to get involved. Okay, final thing for today on that front. We have a free guide. Many of you may not know this. The Ripple Effect Institute, which is our arm now to train people for action. We have a free guide called How to Get Involved Right Now, How to Make a Difference Without Burning Out. And it is already linked below in the show notes. I'm going to link it again in the comments. You should go download it. It's packed full of ideas about how to get involved in your own community and do that work without losing your shit. Okay. Really, really important. And I will also just mention that, we here like in my day job, in our corporate job, are deeply engaged in working with leaders who are really out right now to make like a legacy level difference for future generations. Some of them are in the comments here. I think it's really important right now that if you feel a call to do something big, you actually do something more than, your basic, I'm showing up for a protest with Indivisible. I think that's a great entry level point. But what I'm interested in, and I don't want to knock Indivisible because they're all my friends, right? Like I love Leah. She's amazing. But I do just want to point this out, okay? Some of us know we're here for really big stuff, right? We know we're here to build out like legacy level stuff. And we're here to try to make as big a difference as possible because we care so much and we kind of can't avoid that nagging sense that like the difference matters. So if that's you, I'm going to link below an opportunity to book a free strategy call with yours truly or someone on our team, because the Ripple Effect Institute is doing incredible work to build that kind of leadership that allows for huge projects, rebuilding projects, big projects to be built that will change the course of American history. If you want to get in on that, you should book a free call with me. All right. That's it for today. Lots of love to you all. This was a very long broadcast, much longer than usual. Oh my God, I can't remember the last time I went 51 and a half minutes. So grateful to all of you. Please make sure that you subscribe, like, share this broadcast, comment if you're watching after the fact. And I will catch you all here on Tuesday live. Again, there is a bonus broadcast for our Patreon subscribers today at 3:30 p.m. ET. I will be sharing in that broadcast, by the way, just for our Patreon people, some of the new goodies that we have coming on Patreon. So a little bit of the secret sauce is going to be shared in that broadcast before it becomes public. So head on over there, become a paid subscriber. I will see our Patreon people at 3:30. And I wish the rest of you a relaxing, engaged, difference-making weekend. All right, everyone, take care of yourselves. Lots of love. Bye.